The second facial context that we're looking at is age, beginning with early age, where there are significant proportional differences between a child's head and an adult head. And as you might guess, it's not a simple scale down of an adult head, like painters of the past learned the hard way. Instead, some parts of the head get scaled and moved around at different rates. In short, the growth of the head is concentrated in the face, growing more down and outward than the rest of the head. And we can use a couple growth reference points as a guide for reproportioning. By age 2, the human brain reaches 80% of its final size, so the cranium doesn't change that much compared to other parts. And by age 3, human eyes are 90 to 95% of final size, but perceptually from the outside, eyes reach full size by 3 months of age. And that's where the big-eyed cuteness of babies comes from.
So cute.
So in this lesson, we're going to take the adult head that we've sculpted so far and transform it into a child around the ages of 2 or 3, the toddler stage. And we're going to do that once again in a shape key so that we can see the before and after. Now, we've got the choice between either the masculine head or the feminine head as a starting point. And it's actually going to be a shortcut if we use the feminine head because we've softened a lot of those features that are more rigidly defined in the masculine head, and a child's facial features are going to be softer by nature. So it makes sense to start from the feminine side. And I'm going to rename the shape key woman and essentially duplicate this by using the down arrow new shape from mix option. And I'll name this child. If we turn off the woman and enable child, you can see we're starting from the feminine side. And also I want to open a reference image, CC01L12. If we take a look at that, obviously it's a page full of very cute kids. And that cuteness is going to be a factor as we get towards the latter half of the video. But the upper 2/3 of this image are primarily the age we're going for, around that 2 years of age mark, though some are infants and some are probably a little bit older. But on the bottom row, we've got children between 5 and 10. And my thinking with this is whenever we're finished with the toddler face, as we gradually increase the shape key, hopefully the in-betweens will look like, an older kid or even a teenager. But we'll test that out once we get there. As always, I like to have a sheet of reference open for a bit of guidance. And now we're ready to manipulate the head. So I'm going to start with those 2 reference growth points, namely the 80% size of the head. So what I'm going to do is shift right click to place my cursor, which you can't see because in my overlays I've disabled that. But now you can see the cursor is in the middle of the brain area above the ear. And we're going to scale the entire head down according to that point. However, before I start to scale, keep in mind that we have actually stuck the cursor onto the surface of the model where we want it to be in the center of the model. So I need to open my in panel, specifically the view tab, and change the 3D cursor X location to 0. This way we will scale in the center of the head rather than being skewed towards one side. All right, so back to the 3 number pad orthographic side view, tab into edit mode, and I'm going to select everything, change my pivot to be the 3D cursor, and we are going to hit S and then 0.8. Okay, that scales the entire head to 80% of its adult size, which will mean that the majority of the cranium doesn't have to be touched that much, certainly not in a large proportional sense. Next, we're going to look at the eyeball. So in my opinion, it's not crucial that we scale this by 95% because that's such an inconsequential value. But if we want to be anal about that, certainly we can hit S 0.95. But more importantly, I want to place this backward in the head, generally in the location that it's going to be. But this is a very temporary state of the eyeball location because we are going to be moving the whole eye socket and brow backward very shortly. Primarily, I just don't want this sticking out of the head like it was. So I'm just going to push it back a little bit. And with that scaled and roughly located, we're ready to start manipulating the face, which we need to do in sculpt mode. So I'm going to select the head, switch over to sculpt mode. And remember, as I said earlier, the main growth changes are the face growing down and out from childhood to adulthood. So in this case, we're reversing that, going from adult to child. So I need to grab the lower part of the face and start to smush it upward. And with my grab brush, using a large brush radius, I can grab the chin and start to push that up. Now, if you run into these artifacts, they're caused by the fall off. So I'm going to undo that and choose fall off projected instead of spherical. And that should solve that really harsh fall off line. Okay, so let's undo that. And we're gradually, again, with a big brush size, we're going to start pushing the bottom of the face upward. And I am using the default smooth fall off for this. Really just going by feel, I would say maybe about 60% of the height of the face. I'm trying to smush that up. Also, you can gauge it by bringing the top of the lip into alignment with the bottom of the ear where it connects. Not the bottom of the earlobe, but where the ear connects to the head. So maybe bring this up just a little bit more. And next, we'll push inward the brow. This is a pretty large change where the brow tends to protrude outward as a child grows into an adult. But during the child state, it's notably pushed backward. And this also brings our eye location into question. So let's push it backward, making sure it sits in the eyelids. And that's actually pretty good as far as eye placement. Maybe push it up just a little bit higher. And then back to the side view before I move on to a different perspective. The nose is one of the features that grows out the most and also down. So I want to bring the tip of the nose up. Let's see, I must be on, I must have had the eyes selected when I switched to sculpt mode. So let's go back to the head. I want to bring the nose up because on children, it does turn upward rather than downward. And from the front, you can see in the nostrils a little more clearly. So bringing the tip of the nose up and then smushing it backward. Again, all this being done with a fairly broad brush size. Maybe bring the bottom of the nose back too. Give the lips a little more pucker. And let's see what that looks like from a perspective view. Not very believable at all. We're in this weird middle ground between adult and child. But those are important steps to make in the face. The next thing I want to do is adjust the neck because there's a major difference between the size and definition of the neck from adult to child. For one, the proportions are completely off. And I tried to find a definitive measurement for how much to scale the neck down, but I couldn't really find solid information about that online. The only measurement I have is that typically the height of an entire human body can be measured in about 7 head lengths, whereas for a child, it's measured in about 4 head lengths. And so practically what that means is I really need to scale down the shoulders and neck. And so to mask off the face so I don't adjust any of that along the way, I'm going to hit Shift Control, left click and drag a marquee selection, cutting that off at the base of the jaw and skull. Hit the A hotkey to smooth the mask, Shift R to repeat that. There we go, we have a nice smooth transition. And now turn off overlays is my preference so I don't see that big black spot on the model. And I can start to bring up the neck significantly. Again, I'm thinking like the 60% realm. All right, kind of in all directions. So we're going to shrink the shoulders way up, shrink the neck from front to back. And then from the front, we really need to decrease the width of the shoulders. Also decrease the angle of the trapezius. That is not something you really see defined in an infant, or toddler rather, and definitely not in an infant either. And so with the proportions roughed out, I immediately want to fix the definition because it's so creepy seeing this level of definition on a child's neck. So I'm going to grab the fill brush, start to fill in the definition. So a combination of filling and smoothing. I'm going to switch over to my pen for a little more intuitive action. And really, I want hardly any leftover definition from a collarbone or the sternocleidomastoid. So I'm going to diminish this as much as possible. I'm going to pinch the front edge of our bust. That way I can have a smooth fall off. I don't have to have that collarbone be kind of the end point. I want to get rid of this jugular notch. Use the inflate brush to push that back. The sternal and clavicular head. And just really smooth this into a rounded cylinder as much as possible. This definition only comes out through age. And extreme poses. So if we look at our reference, we can see in this kid that as he turns his head all the way to one side, we do see some of this muscle definition come out. However, what I'm more going for in a neutral state is like this, a very roly-poly, pudgy neck, mostly defined by a cylinder and large wrinkles and rolls. And so I'm going to actually cut sort of the base of that cylinder with the crease brush, holding control. I don't need the stabilized stroke. Maybe they renamed that since the last time I recorded. I don't remember it being called that. I'm going to lightly cut that in, pinch it, and this is going to be the connection where we will eventually add a roll to that. But right now I'm just trying to simplify the structure so it looks far less adult-like. And same thing orbiting around to the back. We don't need to see the individual columns of the trapezius. So with our fill brush, just fill in that valley in the middle. And the backbone, definitely going to remove that. Keep it nice and smooth. Again, the definition in the neck is so much less as a young child compared to being an adult. And if you think about it, that's one of the places where you really can depend on making your character look either young or old, is the level of definition in the neck. If I remember correctly, yeah, this kid looks to be about 10, maybe 11 years old, and we start to see that definition coming about. So closer towards puberty, but in the 2 to 3 year old range, hardly any definition. Okay. Just trying to make the neck more cylindrical. There we go. Now that it is a cylinder, I can also better gauge the length of the neck, which now looking at it this way, I think the neck is still a little bit too long. It's more into the like 5-year-old range rather than 2 or 3. So I'm going to bring the neck up. There we go. That's looking better. And again, I will come back to the neck to add some of the rolls that's so cute about this age. But for now, this is good enough as kind of a halfway point. So let's go back to the face and reassess our features to make them childlike. The biggest one is going to be the volume of the cheeks. All right, so I'm going to grab my inflate brush. And while I need to clear my mask, I believe, Alt-M to clear the mask, and start inflating some massive cheeks. And keep in mind that I don't want the cheeks to look like we're just holding air in the cheeks, but there's some weight to this extra flesh. And so I want to introduce a hanging aesthetic to this flesh as well. And part of emphasizing that is the fact that children seem to have their neutral corners of the mouth pulled down as a result of the weight in the cheeks. Right? So these two kids have that happening. And especially this kid, I don't really think he looks sad as much as this is just his neutral face, even though the corners of the mouth are pulled down so much. Man, these kids are so cute. So I want to introduce that by pulling down the corners of the mouth. Also, we're going to shrink the width of the mouth while keeping the vertical height. All right, so let's move that towards the center. That's going to feel more kid-like. And we don't have to completely smooth out the facial features like the nasolabial fold and the marionette line. We can keep those around depending on the kid. Like this guy doesn't really have so much definition, but then this kid does. Both of them are cute. I think it's just depending on the specific kid. So I think I will add those. There's something about additional like pudgy feeling that I like. We're going to keep them light and make sure that they don't look lean, but they're very plump. So back to the inflate brush, just trying to emphasize the size of the cheeks. while also reducing some of the skeletal structure, like the cheekbones do not need this much definition. There we go. That's starting to be better. Let's see. I've plumped a lot of the cheek sides, but not much of the cheek fronts. So let's plump that out as well. There we go. Starting to get into a cute pinchable cheek range. I think my nasolabial folds are oriented too horizontally. Clearly with this kid, the weight of the cheeks is bringing them much more downward in orientation. There we go, that's helping. And also we'll carry the weight of these cheeks under the chin and under the jaw to give it some sharp creases and rolls. This is maybe where I will add another crease on the actual neck to emphasize the rolly nature of the skin. Again, taking our main reference from this cute kid. Far less muscle structure and way more fat, rolly structure. I can bring down the connection of neck to jaw because we do want that to angle upward, whereas with an adult, it angles the opposite direction towards the ear. And with that, I definitely don't want much jawline definition. It's only going to be fat definition. There we go. Nice pudgy kid. Although I still feel like we're older than the 2 to 3 year range, but that might have a lot to do with the eyes and the nose. Yeah, so let's move our attention to the nose. So from the side, we obviously oriented it better, more childlike, but from the front, it still looks like an adult nose. So we need to pull it sideways, kind of the opposite effect of the mouth, where we want to increase the width, but leave the vertical height. And there's definitely this smushed quality to the nose. So I'm just keeping an eye on my reference and trying to make it match. Plump up the nostrils a bit because the holes are fairly small. I want to get rid of any ridges. It's a very, very smooth structure of the nose in a child. And up into the bridge of the nose, you know, the furrowed brow, we can get rid of that. Keep everything nice and smooth up here. Still, I think I need to bring out the width of the nose. On this kid, the width of the nose is almost as wide as his mouth. And then on the tip of the nose, there's a little bit of probably geometric issues that's not allowing for very smooth final surface quality. So in those situations, I'll switch over to the scrape brush and touch those problematic areas. There we go, that's helping. It's definitely feeling better, more childlike. Now the eyes, that's probably the last remaining offensive part that's left over from the adult version. And the primary difference here is I want to widen the vertical height of the eye. Sort of the same effect as the mouth, but we're going to achieve it the opposite way. So instead of shrinking the width, we're going to increase the height. So with my grab brush in the center, broad brush size, we're going to bring that up. And then on the lower lid, bring that down. That's looking much better. Now, similar to the cheeks, we're going to plump out the volume around the eyes, most notably in two spots, the superior orbital fat and the inside of the inferior orbital fat. So if we look at this kid, the eye in general seems to be enveloped by that plumpiness, which is most emphasized on the inside of the inferior orbital fat. So let's use my inflate brush and plump that out, kind of tapering off towards the center, and then use my crease brush to emphasize the wrinkle. Pinch brush to do the same. There we go, that looks pretty good. And then on the superior orbital fat, we we want to plump that out a lot. I want to be mindful of the existing wrinkles when I use inflate. I don't want them to create artifacts. But also I'll bring the corner of the eye down as a result of that extra flesh that we're plumping out to give it the sense of weight that is appropriate. That's a pretty good start to a childlike eye. Again, I'm going to reduce the zygomatic process definition, maybe inflate some of the temple in an effort to reduce the temporal line ridge. That's looking much, much better. And next, I want to decrease the outward peak of the brow. Okay, so as an adult, there's this definitive outward push for the brow, whereas for children, if we take a look at this 3/4 view, there is no such peak. It's almost pushed entirely flat, but there is a little bit of definition left for the eyebrow. And we have approximated that with a nice crisp line. So I want that to remain, but volume-wise, I want it all to go backward. So I'm going to use my inflate brush, make it fairly large, and just trace, by holding control, trace the outline of that eyebrow. All right, so we're going to push it flat, but the eyebrow ridge still remains. The volume has just been pushed significantly back. And then from the 3/4 angle, I can also push that back manually, maybe pull out the forehead a little bit. There we go, much more flat in terms of the brow. I think I went a little bit too far on the inside. So maybe I will inflate that back out. And looking at it a little bit closer, I think I did go a little bit too far. So I want to use my crease brush and push out the brow approximation line just a little bit. And maybe instead of flattening that so much, I'll bring out the forehead. There we go. That's starting to achieve more of the shape we see in the reference. Just smoothing out any bumps and ridges that we don't want, like this temporal process. I do not want that so defined. And at this point, we look much more childlike, but still it's not as cute as I want it to be. And so to achieve that cuteness, I want to maybe exaggerate some of these principles we've gone over, like the size of the head being large. That's one of the features that can make a kid more cute. For example, this redheaded kid, the head seems much bigger than what I have, and the face is smaller, lending itself to a cuter feel. And also the ears are kind of flaring out. So I want to introduce that. Even though it's not necessarily a rule, we see ears starting to flare out with this kid as well, but not necessarily with this kid. But for the cuteness factor, which I think is important whenever we're trying to achieve a childlike aesthetic, I'm going to pursue that with, more artistic liberties. There's also a pretty big lump in the forehead. I want to smooth that out. But I can either pull out the head size, which I might do a little bit of that, or shrink more the face. So let's bring up, the face volume, for example. And the ears, of course. All right, so let's orient them differently. I'm going to hit Shift Control, drag a marquee around the ear, hit A and smooth the mask, Control I to invert, and I'm going to paint out with my mask brush. I don't want any of the head to be rotated in this process. So I'm going to paint that out so it's just the ear, maybe even eclipse a little bit of the back of the ear. And now I've got a mask to rotate. And turn off our overlays, choose Sculpt, Set Pivot to Unmasked. And let's use our rotation. Wait a minute. Set Pivot to Unmasked. That doesn't seem to be working. Okay, I cannot get that to work. That's fine. We'll just use the grab brush instead. And I'm just going to flare it out a bit. So pull out the outside, maybe push in the inside. Just trying to twist it slightly. And as far as the ear shapes themselves, really I find very little difference in the shape of a baby's ear versus an adult ear, other than just being generally more plump and soft, rather than the bumpy, firm ridges that you see in some adult ears. I'm gonna Alt-M to clear the mask. But yeah, if we look at this kid's ear, that looks just like an adult ear to me. But definitely more of a roundedness, like here, kind of a plump roundedness, which is a common theme you hear me saying over and over when it comes to these kids. But I'm not going to spend too much time on the ears since it's not a consequential factor for a child aesthetic, child structure. But it is lower on the face, right? Which we kind of achieved whenever we pulled the lower face upward. Comparing to an adult, the ear does appear to sit lower on the face. And at this point, it's pretty much just a game of just polishing off features. So like the back of the head, you know, same kind of deal. Let's just reduce some of this definition using the fill brush, smooth brush. I want to reduce the pot marks and divots, stray ridges, that kind of thing. And overall, this is looking much, much more like a child. I like the flared out ears. I think that helps. And now if we look at the before and after, it's pretty interesting to see that transition. And then, you know, we said we would test ages in between. So if we go to like 0.7, that does sort of look like maybe age 10 to 13. We start to see more muscle definition in the neck. Then if we go to like 0.5, maybe a teenager. 0.2, late teens, early 20s, and then 0, late 20s or 30s. So that's kind of fun to step through that shape key, but primarily, I hope you've learned from this lesson the general principles of facial structure differences between an adult and a child and can apply that in your own sculpts. In the next lesson, we'll switch gears a bit and look at weight before getting into old age.